My dad told me it was just a few documents for college. I trusted him. At 17, I signed away every penny my mom left me. 10 years later, I walked into his boardroom and fired him. Stay with me as I take you through the story of how a quiet teenager became the woman who took down her own father. Not out of hate, but for justice. When I was 17, I was the kind of girl who always followed the rules. I kept to myself, studied hard, and stayed out of trouble. My mom, Maura, had passed away when I was 12, and ever since then, it was just me and my dad, Victor Croft. He was the CEO of a big biomedical company in North Carolina, always dressed in suits, always on calls, always too busy. He didn't really talk to me unless he needed something. But still, I wanted to believe he cared in his own way. After high school graduation, he told me I needed to sign some forms for college. Just standard stuff, he said. Financial aid, housing, legal things. All very normal. I didn't understand the details, but I trusted him. He was my father. I signed everything without reading too closely. He even smiled a little and said, "You're growing up." I had no idea that with those signatures, I gave away everything my mom had left for stocks, money, her trust, everything. Years passed and life wasn't kind. I didn't get the college support I expected. I ended up working part-time at a hardware store and taking community college classes when I could afford them. I thought maybe there was a mistake. When I finally asked the school, they told me I had no trust, no savings, nothing. It didn't make sense. That's when I reached out to one of my mom's old friends. She told me something that shook me. My mom had left me 30% of Croft Dynamics. 30%. I nearly dropped the phone. But all of it had been transferred, the day after my graduation. My name was on the transfer papers. I knew what had happened. He had lied. He had planned it. When I confronted my dad, he didn't deny it. He looked me in the eye and said, "You were a child. I did what was best. Like my future didn't matter. Like my mom's wishes meant nothing." That night, I left and never went back. But that was just the beginning. I wasn't going to let him win. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one day I would take back what he stole. And he would remember the girl he underestimated. When I turned 21, I thought I had finally found some balance. I was working at a hardware store during the day and attending community college part-time at night. It wasn't a dream life, but it was mine. I was paying my way through slowly, hoping that one day I could study business full-time and make something of myself. Then, out of nowhere, I got an email from the registrar's office. My tuition grant had been denied. Confused, I went in to speak with them. I thought maybe it was a paperwork error, but when they pulled up my file, the woman behind the desk frowned and said, "You were denied because of financial history. There's no record of a trust or assets in your name. Never has been." That made no sense. I had always believed my mom left something for me. She loved me. I remembered hearing people mention it after her funeral. So why was there nothing? Panicked, I reached out to one of the only people I remembered from my mom's life, a woman named Darlene, who used to work with her. She hadn't heard from me in years but agreed to meet. When I told her what happened, she looked at me with a sadness that made my stomach drop. "Elena," she said, "your mother left you 30% of Croft Dynamics in a trust. She made it very clear that it was for you and only you. She didn't trust Victor to manage it." My head started spinning. 30%? Of a whole company? I asked if she was sure. Darlene nodded and said, "I helped Maura set it up." That night, I dug through the old paperwork I had brought with me when I moved out. And there it was, a copy of the trust. The signature at the bottom was mine. The date? The day after my high school graduation. The transfer? Straight to my father. I couldn't breathe. I called him and told him I needed to talk. When I showed up at the house, he was in his home office, calm and cold as ever. I laid the papers on the table. "You took everything," I said. My voice was shaking. "This was mine." He didn't even flinch. "You were a child," he replied. "You wouldn't have known how to handle it. I'm protecting the legacy." I stared at him, trying to find even a trace of guilt. But there was nothing. Just the same blank, calculating look he'd always had. That was it for me. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just walked out. I left the house that night with nothing but a backpack and my anger. But that was also the moment something changed in me. I wasn't just a scared girl anymore. I was someone who had been wronged, and one day, I was going to make it right. After I walked out of my father's house, I had no plan. I crashed on a friend's couch for a while, then moved into her garage when her parents needed the space. It wasn't much, just a mattress, a lamp, and a space heater that barely worked. But it was mine. I had a part-time job unloading boxes at a logistics startup. It didn't pay much, but it kept me afloat. There were nights I cried myself to sleep. I felt stupid for trusting him, angry at myself for not reading the papers. But over time, the tears stopped. The pain didn't go away, it changed. It became something sharp and steady. I didn't want pity. I wanted power. I wanted to understand exactly how he stole everything from me and how to take it back. So I started learning. Every night after work, I'd go online and read everything I could: finance blogs, business books, case studies. I watched free lectures on YouTube. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. While the world thought I was just some girl stocking shelves, I was building something inside myself, brick by brick. I learned how companies were structured, how contracts were written, how hostile takeovers worked. I studied shareholder rights, boardroom politics, and mergers. I'd print out legal documents and highlight them like homework. I didn't have a college degree, but I was educating myself in a way no classroom ever could. At 22, I legally changed my name to Elena Quinn. Quinn was my grandmother's maiden name. Croft was dead to me. Elena Quinn didn't carry the weight of betrayal. She carried fire. 2 years later, I landed a job as a junior analyst at a mid-tier venture capital. It was the break I had been working toward. I kept my head down, worked twice as hard as everyone else, and listened more than I spoke. My boss once told me I had an eye for blood in the water. He had no idea what that really meant. While I was building my career, I kept tabs on Croft Dynamic. Quietly, carefully. I read every article, every press release. The company was struggling. My father's leadership had grown even colder and more arrogant. He fired good employees to cut costs. He backed the wrong projects. His old-school methods didn't work in a changing industry. Investors were uneasy. Former employees were bitter. It was slow, but the cracks were showing. And I was watching. I didn't want revenge that screamed. I wanted the kind that waited in silence and struck when it hurt most. I wasn't ready yet, but I was getting there. Every number I read, every contract I studied, every mistake he made, I remembered it all. Because when the time came, I wouldn't just fight back. I would burn the whole empire down, and then rebuild it under my name. By the time I turned 25, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. I had a sharp resume, a list of strong contacts, and a reputation in certain circles as someone who didn't miss detail. I spoke at small conferences, advised on startup turnaround, and got used to being called Miss Quinn. No one asked about my past. I liked it that way. That's when I decided it was time to make my move. I created a shell investment firm and called it Arrowhall Partners. The name meant nothing. That was the point. It sounded clean, professional, quiet. I brought in a few silent investors, people I'd met in the VC world who liked results more than names. They didn't care who I was, only that I delivered. And I was about to. Croft Dynamics had become unstable. My father had attempted 2 new tech pivots, one involving outdated AI software and another in medical wearables that never made it past prototype. Both failed. Badly. Morale was down, layoffs were up, and the board was growing impatient. Victor was still pretending he had everything under control, but even from a distance, I could see the cracks getting wider. Through Arrowhall, I started buying shares. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious. I spread it across quarters, small chunks from quiet sellers. Most of them were tired of the company. Burned out executives, early employees who had lost faith, even a few board members who wanted out quietly. To them, Arrowhall was just another faceless fund. And that was perfect. I studied every move my father made. I read board minutes, financial disclosures, stockholder letters. I listened to investor calls with the kind of attention people usually give to courtroom confessions. I saw the weaknesses. I saw which directors were frustrated, but too polite to speak up. I saw where he cut R&D funding just to balance quarterly numbers. It was all short-term thinking. My father had once built something solid. Now he was trying to hold on to an image. But I wasn't that scared 17-year-old anymore. I was Elena Quinn, and I wasn't coming to ask for anything. I was coming to take it. Piece by piece, I built my influence. Quietly. No headlines, no drama. I held 2%, then 4%, then 8% through different partners and trusts tied to Arrowhall. By the time I reached 12%, I knew I had enough to get into the boardroom when I was ready. I didn't tell anyone who I was. Not yet. That moment would come. But first, I had to make sure that when I showed up, there would be no escape, no excuses. Only the truth. My father had taken everything from me once. Now I was building the path to take everything back. And this time, I would leave nothing behind. Victor Croft had always believed he was untouchable. He built Croft Dynamics from the ground up, ran it with an iron grip, and made sure no one could challenge him. Not employees, not shareholders, not even family. Especially not family. So when he received a formal notice of an emergency shareholder meeting, he assumed it was routine. Maybe a last-minute pitch. Maybe a desperate investor wanting to propose another failing merger. He didn't bother reading the details too closely. He showed up in his usual designer suit, confident and unbothered, ready to dismiss whoever dared waste his time. But the moment he walked into the boardroom, the atmosphere was different. The board members were already seated, 10 of them silent and still. No one made small talk. No one smiled. They looked at him like they were waiting for something. Or someone. Then his eyes shifted to the head of the table. There she was, Elena. Or rather, Elena Quinn. 6 years had passed since they'd last seen each other. The shy, quiet teenager he had manipulated was gone. The woman in front of him was poised, calm, dressed in a sleek navy suit, and completely unshaken by his presence. He blinked. What is this? Elena didn't stand up. She simply placed her hand on the thick binder in front of her and said, "This is a shareholder-triggered emergency meeting to vote on your removal as CEO of Croft Dynamic." Silence. Then confusion. Then shock. Victor scoffed. On what grounds? Elena's voice was steady. Per Section 9 of your shareholder agreement, a CEO may be removed with just cause upon shareholder consensus exceeding 40%. Arrowhall Partners and its associated trusts now control 52%. The words hit like a punch. Victor stared at her. Arrowhall is your firm? She finally stood. It is. He looked around the room, expecting resistance, maybe even support. He found none. The board members didn't meet his eyes. Some looked down. Some looked relieved. A few looked quietly satisfied. This is ridiculous, Victor said. You're my daughter. No, Elena replied. I was your daughter. Then you made me sign away my future. Now, I'm your replacement. She turned to the board. Shall we proceed? One by one, the votes came in. Each yes felt like a nail in a coffin. Victor didn't speak. He just stood there, frozen, as the final vote confirmed what he never thought possible. He was out. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't shout or smile. She simply picked up the CEO nameplate from the center of the table, turned it over, and placed a new one down. Elena Quinn, interim CEO. The room was silent. Victor stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked out without a word. Elena sat back down, took a deep breath, and looked around the room that once belonged to him. Now it was hers. Taking over Croft Dynamics was the easy part. What came next was the real work. The company I inherited wasn't the powerful force it used to be. On paper, it looked solid, still profitable, still respected, but under the surface, it was falling apart. My father had drained it dry with bad decisions, endless layoffs, and a work culture that ran on fear and silence. Morale was at rock bottom. Half the good people had already left, and the ones who stayed looked tired and bitter. The first thing I did was launch a full internal audit. I wanted to know exactly what I was walking into. The results were worse than I expected. Financial mismanagement, bloated executive bonuses, unpaid vendor contracts, and worst of all, the company's most valuable patents were set to expire within 18 months. Victor had been too focused on appearances to prepare for the future. He hadn't built anything new in years, so I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I started by rehiring a few key employees my father had fired. Talented researchers, honest managers, people who actually cared about the company. One of them, Ravi Patel, had led the R&D division before being pushed out for questioning Victor's budget cuts. He was shocked when I called. "Are you serious?" he asked. "You want me back?" "Yes," I said. "And I want you to bring back the program my mother started." That got his attention. My mother, Maura, had dreamed of building a lab that focused on accessible biotech, affordable tools for real people, not just high-dollar hospital contracts. Victor shelved the program after she passed, said it wasn't strategic, but I believed in it, and I knew reviving it would remind people that Croft Dynamics used to have a heart. I also restructured salaries, cutting inflated executive pay, and using those funds to give fair raises to mid-level staff. People started talking in the hallways again, smiling. I walked the office floors, listened to ideas, and sat in meetings without dominating. For the first time in years, employees were being heard. No flashy announcements, no headlines, just quiet, steady changes. A week after the transition, I moved into my father's old office. I didn't make a show of it. No ceremony, no speech. I just walked in, sat down at the desk, and took a deep breath. His nameplate was still sitting there. I picked it up and placed it in a drawer. I didn't replace it with mine. I didn't need to. The office didn't belong to him anymore. And it wasn't about revenge at that moment. It was about responsibility. The empire he built was cracked and hollow. But I wasn't here to wear his crown. I was here to clean up the mess and start something better. Victor didn't take his removal quietly. A week after I took over, I received a formal email from him, polite on the surface but dripping with arrogance. He offered to consult for Croft Dynamics, suggesting that his decades of experience would be invaluable during this leadership transition. In return, he wanted exclusive control over several core patents. The ones still tied to early research my mother helped develop. The ones I was working hard to revive. It was laughable, honestly, but I didn't laugh. I replied with a short, professional no. No emotion, no explanation. He didn't like that. Within days, I began receiving legal notices. His lawyers claimed I acted in bad faith, that I'd manipulated the board and misled shareholders. He hinted at defamation. Said he'd sue if I didn't step down and return certain family-held rights. Classic Victor. When charm failed, he turned to threats. But I came prepared. I met him one last time, in a quiet conference room on the lower floor of the building he once ruled. He walked in like he still owned the place, shoulders squared, eyes cold. "You think you've won," he said, "but you don't understand how this works. I built this company." I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a scanned copy of the trust transfer he made me sign at 17. The one that gave him everything my mother had left me. It had a forged witness signature, notarized by an old friend of his who'd since vanished from the industry. Victor's face went pale as he looked it over. "You forged it," I said quietly. "You knew I wouldn't understand the paperwork. You planned it." He opened his mouth to argue, but I raised a hand. "Don't worry," I added. "I'm not pressing charges. I don't need to." He narrowed his eyes. "Then why bring it up?" I leaned forward and smiled, just slightly. "Because I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me something." I tapped the page in front of him. "You showed me how a pen can steal power. Now I know how to use it to take it back." Victor didn't respond. He just stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of him. The headlines hit the next week. CEO ousted by daughter in stunning takeover. Croft legacy ends in silence. Victor Croft loses seat at his own table. No company would touch him after that. Investors didn't trust him. Startups didn't want the bad press. His name became a cautionary tale in business circles, proof that arrogance can't save you from your own past. He tried calling me once after that meeting. I didn't answer. He had taught me well. But he forgot one thing. Dead weight doesn't float. And I wasn't dragging him with me anymore. When the lawsuit came, I wasn't surprised. It was Victor's last desperate move. He claimed I'd taken over Croft Dynamics through manipulation and deceit, that I was emotionally unstable and acting out of revenge, not business sense. He painted himself as the victim, an aging father betrayed by a bitter daughter. The lawsuit was full of dramatic claims, but little substance. Still, he managed to get a court date, and the media ate it up. The courtroom was cold and quiet on the day of the trial. I sat with my lawyer, calm, composed. Victor sat across from me, his once confident face now tense and lined. He didn't look like a powerful CEO anymore. He looked like a man clinging to the last thread of his pride. When it was time for our side to speak, I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. My lawyer stood and began laying everything out, methodically, fact by fact. First came the trust documents from when I was 17. The ones my father had me sign under the false claim of college paperwork. Then came the notarization, proven to be forged, signed by a friend of his who conveniently disappeared the year after. Next, we presented emails and memos from inside Croft Dynamics, documents showing years of poor management, dishonest reporting to shareholders, and unethical firing practices. Everything he tried to bury, we dug up and laid bare. Victor tried to object, but the evidence was too strong. Every piece of paper was a nail in the coffin of his credibility. At one point, his lawyer tried to bring up my name change, suggesting it was proof of mental instability. I almost laughed. Changing my name wasn't instability, it was survival. It was reclaiming what he tried to erase. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. "I didn't take this company out of revenge," I said. "I took it back because it was mine to begin with. My mother built the heart of it, and he ripped that away, for profit, for ego. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done being silent." The judge didn't take long. Case dismissed. Victor didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen, as the reporters outside shouted questions and flashbulbs popped. His face was pale, hollow, like the fight had finally drained out of him. I walked out alone. No victory pose, no smile for the cameras. I didn't need the world to know what this meant. I already knew. He tried to use the system to break me again. But this time I had the truth. And the truth cut deeper than anything he could have thrown at me. As I stepped into the sunlight, I didn't look back. Not once. The past had tried to follow me into that courtroom, but I left it there, cold, silent, and finished. It was a quiet morning when I drove out to the edge of town, the land my mother once dreamed of turning into something beautiful. I hadn't been there since I was a child. Back then, she used to bring me on weekends, pointing at the trees and tall grass, telling me, "One day, this will be a place for discovery, for healing." She never got the chance to build it. After she died, Victor sold the dream before it even began. Or at least he thought he did. But now, 10 years later, I had the power to bring it back. With the profits from Croft Dynamics finally turning stable and strong, I quietly bought the land back. No big announcement, no press release. Just a single wire transfer and a signed deed with my name on it, Elena Quinn. I started construction on what I called the Mora Foundation. It would be a biotech learning center focused on affordable research, community outreach, and youth education. The exact kind of place my mother had always imagined. labs that welcomed curious minds, programs designed for schools that couldn't afford fancy partnerships, nature trails woven through the surrounding woods, connecting science with serenity. No one knew why I chose this project. Reporters asked, of course. Investors were curious. But I never gave them the real answer. I let them believe what they wanted. That I was expanding the Croft Dynamics brand. That I was making a smart philanthropic move. That I was just building something to make the company look good. Let them think that. To the world, I had become a quiet powerhouse. Ruthless in strategy, calm in meetings, feared in boardroom. That's how they described me in magazines. Sharp, calculated, impossible to read. Maybe they were right. But this place, this land, was the only part of me that was still soft. I visited the site often while it was being built, always alone. I walked the trails in silence, imagining her beside me, her voice pointing out wildflowers, her hands sketching lab layouts in the air. I could almost hear her saying, "You did it, Lena." But I didn't do it for praise. I didn't do it for legacy. I did it because something inside me still needed to make her proud. No reporters were invited to the opening. No speeches. Just a small team of researchers, educators, and staff ready to work. The sign went up quietly at the entrance. The Mora Foundation, science rooted in compassion. People said I was building an empire. Maybe I was. But this was never about power. It was about finishing a dream my mother started, and giving the little girl I used to be something to believe in again. 10 years ago, I was just a teenager signing papers I didn't understand. Today, I walk through the same building where those papers were once used against me, and the name above the door is no longer Croft Dynamic. It's Quinn Biosystems now. The new sign went up last month. Sleek, clean, bold lettering on glass. No ceremony, no press release. I didn't need to tell anyone that this used to be Victor Croft's company. I didn't have to explain what happened or how. The people who mattered already knew. As I walked through the halls that morning, employees greeted me with nods, a few smiles. It wasn't the kind of workplace my father ran, cold, tense, silent. It was alive now. People talked, shared ideas, laughed by the elevator. I saw familiar faces, some who had left during the bad years but returned once things started to change. They believed in the new vision, in the future we were building together. I stopped at the wall where the old mission statement used to hang. My father's words had been full of profit-driven promises and market language. Now, in its place, stood a simple line. Science with purpose. Innovation with heart. I didn't need to sign my name under it. Everyone already knew whose words those were. Upstairs in my office, my assistant handed me the latest quarterly report. I flipped through the pages. Record-breaking growth, new international partnerships, several patents granted, and 3 new biotech programs funded through the Mora Foundation. It was everything I'd worked for. Every long night, every sacrifice, every silent battle had led to this. I should have felt triumphant. I should have wanted to celebrate. But I just smiled, closed the file, and said, let's get back to work. Because this wasn't the end. It wasn't the finish line. It was just another step forward. People still asked me sometimes how I managed to turn everything around, how I dealt with the betrayal, the lawsuits, the pressure. I never gave them the full answer. How could I explain the fire that burned behind every decision I made? The little girl who once cried in silence while her future was stolen from her? The promise I made to myself that I'd never be powerless again? They called me an heir now, said I'd earned the name Quinn like a crown. But to me, it was never about revenge or proving something to the world. It was about rebuilding what should have never been broken. It was about honoring my mother, reclaiming my future, and leading with something my father never understood, compassion. So I don't talk about the past much anymore. I just walk through this company, my company, and let the name on the glass speak for itself. Quinn Biosystems. And that's all it ever needed to say. What about you? Do you believe Elena was right to take back what was hers and leave the past behind? Or should she have given her father one last chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this speak to you, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what comes next.